Thank you and good afternoon. We're at the dead point of the afternoon, but we have a fantastic panel here and are going to energize you all. So let me give a quick introduction to the subject, and then I'll turn to our panelists. So we all know, and we've had many sessions now about that climate action is incredibly urgent, the science is clear, but progress is too slow at best. We heard Bob Moritz today in his very impressive keynote, who said there is no progress at all. One way to look at climate action is that we have to shift the trajectory of growth and build a net zero capital stock. So at its core, climate action has to drive investments and it has to drive innovation. And since we are running out of carbon budget, this investment has to be front-loaded. That in turn will require a very large increase in finance for climate investments. We're all familiar with the numbers. The COP27 high-level group on climate finance, the Songway-Stern report, estimated that we need to ensure additional external finance of 1 trillion annually, external, 1 trillion annually for low and middle-income countries. And that's in addition to significant domestic resource mobilization. And the Chancellor Scholz, said it yesterday, official funding will have to play a crucial role. But in the end, most of the investment, most of the heavy lifting will have to come from private sources. So how do we get there? We have been spectacularly unsuccessful so far. In fact, since the Paris Agreement, the net aggregate finance for developing countries has fallen, not grown. So turning this trend around will take collective action and with a huge sense of urgency. And what I would suggest now is that we talk, we divide our conceptually at least, our conversation into three parts. One is how can we scale up official financial support for the Sustainable Development Goals and the goals of the Paris Agreement, including, but not exclusively, through the Multilateral Development Banks. And second, how can the global financial system deliver a significant expansion of private capital flows in support of development and climate goals? And third, what can be done to scale up concessional finance and more generally to reduce the cost of capital to tackle risks and especially do so in poorer countries? Now, as a panel, you bring great authority and an amazing range of experiences on these questions. Jochen Flassbart on my left is the State Secretary in the German Federal Ministry of Cooperation and is there following a distinguished career in the leadership in climate and environmental affairs for a very long time. Bambang Brojonegoro on our screen is professor at the University of Indonesia and a lead co-chair of the T20. And he's a former finance minister of Indonesia with huge experience in these questions, including in getting the G20 to focus on them. Mo Ibrahim is chairman of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation and with an amazing history of impactful philanthropy, particularly on governance and improving governance. And Anshula Kant on our screen is managing director and group chief financial officer of the World Bank Group. Thank you all for coming, for being there. I'll turn to you first, Jochen, if I may. You have led policy both on the environment and now on international cooperation, and that helps you to look across sources of finance. I know that Germany has been quite instrumental in motivating reforms at the World Bank Group, but also for the broader multilateral development system. Can you give us a perspective on that? Where does that stand? Where is it going to go? And how is it going to go fast?
Thanks, Hans, and really what a pleasure to be here with our online partners and with Mo Ibrahim here at the panel. I'm the first beneficiary of this because I meet him the first time. We should have done it already earlier. And so I was a bit surprised with your introduction. You started with climate, and fair enough. But looking at the title of this panel, Reforming International Development Finance for Global Resilience, I asked myself, what is global resilience? And I think in a nutshell, it's the SDGs. Do we deliver on meeting the SDGs or not? But as you kicked off with the climate finance, let me pick it up. I worked for the British for Alok Sharma in preparation of the COP26 with the first 100 billion delivery plan, which was continued thereafter for the next COP, together with Jonathan Wilkinson from Canada. And that was meant to figure out where we are. We knew it from the OECD figures, and what is needed to catch up. And one of the biggest findings was, for insights for me, was that it was not so much the lack of budget funding that we didn't meet the 100 billion. Yes, there was a need to do more, but the problem was that the leverage factor for public funding to gain private investments was much lower than we expected 5, 6, 7 years before. So now moving it, as we have just a few minutes for the first statement, I understood, pushing it now to the global SDG agenda, moving from the Ministry for Environmental Development, I saw the problem is even bigger. Addressing climate neutrality also on the one hand, but also to meet all the other SDGs needs the trillions. And it's very obvious, even if I would be a genius and could motivate the finance minister to double or triple or quadruple my budget for implementing the SDGs and helping other countries, supporting other countries in doing so, it would not make it. So if we don't get the private sector in, to transparent conditions and in a SDG compatible way, we will not reach our targets. And just to finish here, we are now in the midst, and you quoted that others said it's a big failure. Yes, it is. I mean, it is as it is. We are far away, and not all this is linked to the pandemic and to the Russian war of aggression. We were already behind prior to the pandemic and prior to the war, and now we have to catch up. And the easiest thing, I know a little bit about politics. The easiest thing to do is at a point in time to say, okay, it was ambitious, but now we have to realize we cannot make it. And this must not be. It's not something nice to have. It is essential, and in the broad spectrum. Please don't just limit it to climate change. And it is so close to my heart. Everybody will believe me that I don't want to neglect it. But it's a broad range of the SDGs, 17 SDGs that has to be met.
It's a good point. It's a broader agenda. And also the agenda, the climate agenda, especially from the perspective of the Global South, has to be built into a broader sustainable growth agenda. Otherwise, it's very hard to bring everybody along. Now I'm turning to Bambang. And so now, with your experience as finance minister, Bambang, and with the successive G20 processes, could you comment a bit on the scope for regulation of international finance to support higher capital flows? We hear that the private sector will have to deliver in a huge way. We have to increase mobilization of the private sector. What can better regulation do? Where do we stand? Where is this going?
Thank you so much, Hans, for the opportunity. Before I'm talking about the regulation of international finance, let me echo what previous speaker mentioned about the importance of mainstreaming the goal of climate change financing into the part of the SDG financing, because we believe in SDG financing, we are trying to fulfill not only economic and social sustainability, but also, of course, environmental sustainability. So when it comes to the regulation, I think one of the bottlenecks why there are a lot of potential from private capital cannot flow into or didn't flow too much into, for example, developing economy. I think one of the reasons why most of the capital private financing go to the advanced economy is because the risk appetite, the risk calculation. I think somehow the regulation of international finance should give special treatment to the risk that occurring in the developing economy. And we can use, for example, the rating that has been issued by Standard and Poor, by the other rating agencies. So that could be one of the fundamental. But then to create better risk appetite and eventually lower costs for climate change financing from private capital, then there has to be kind of risk mitigation scheme in which, for example, there is like international effort to provide some kind of the guarantee, the guarantee for private capital that invest in, the climate change issue in developing countries. So with that kind of scheme, let's say the investors can buy, kind of the guarantee from that kind of pool of the fund. And then by using that kind of guarantee, hopefully the appetite to go into maybe higher risk developing economy will be greater. And certainly, aside from the regulation, I believe the role of Multilateral Development Bank as well as philanthropic organization, I think will be critical. At the end of the day, I think blended financing could be one of the solutions to make sure there will be bigger flow of private capital into climate change financing, especially in developing economy. And then, of course, the role of MDBs and philanthropy organization will be helpful in managing the risks or basically neutralizing the risk of developing economy as well as reducing the cost of fund. Maybe that's kind of a regulation that we need from developing perspective.
Thanks. And Bambang, can I just follow up a little bit on this? So blending, who does that? How do they do that? So if you mentioned the MDBs, today the MDBs only mobilize collectively about 20 cents to the dollar in private finance. How are we going to get there?
Yeah, I think MDB could play the role as so-called, first we need to agree about setting up kind of consortium or coalition of climate change financing led, I think, most probably by MDBs, Multilateral Development Banks, and then supported by, again, regional development banks, and also we can include organizations that focusing on specific climate financing, for example, GCF, Green Climate Financing, and we have to include also the philanthropic organization, because then they can provide some kind of technical assistance or the way to reduce the cost of fund or making sure the investment will work well. And then at the end, of course, we need kind of the consortium to maybe we can do kind of consortium pool of fund for climate change that is intended mostly for high-risk country, mostly in developing economy.
Thank you, Bambang. We heard philanthropy. Mo Ibrahim, you've done path-breaking work in that field. Where do you see the role of philanthropy in this common effort to scale up, and in particular, in making sure that the poorest countries don't lose out? A lot of the efforts that we see today seem to be more geared towards middle-income countries and their needs. How do we make sure the poorest, the fragile states don't lose out?
Right. Well, thank you, Hans. But I don't think philanthropy hasn't got that much resources, really, to solve the problems. Philanthropy can help leading the way in raising issues or leveraging something there. But where is philanthropy? I mean, is it Bill Gates? Is it Rockefeller? Is it, it is very limited amount of funds available there. I think, let me just move a little bit from that, and I'm going to focus on Africa. For a simple reason is that Africa has no voice. Nobody listens to Africa. And whenever I have a chance to be in a place like this, I try to focus on Africa, because at least people need to know what African thinks and how they see things, because they are not sitting at the table, unfortunately, at the high table. Let's see what's happening there. Africa has been buffeted by so many problems recently. We've been hit by COVID. People in the north managed to produce $20 trillion out of thin air to support their economies, their companies, their people, their businesses. Africa was not in a position to do any of that, correct? Forget about hoarding the vaccine, and this is a sad story, I don't want to go into it. But that was the hit. COVID really hit Africa, hit it economically more than health-wise. Then we had the Ukraine war, and it's another hit. Suddenly the prices of food, of fuel, etc., gone up. Then we are faced with the debt crisis now. Strong dollar, rising rate, and a lot of African countries, over 20 countries now in distress for debt. None of these issues of African making. They're all external things. Climate, the 10 worst affected countries in the world by climate change are Africans. Africans did not beat this stuff up there. Yeah? You guys of the North did it. So Africa suddenly is being hit by all these external factors, and then you look around, how we can get out of this? Nothing. Then people said, oh, we have the SDR. IMF is going to produce the SDR, $650 billion. And then we found that Africa only allowed 5% of that, 33 billion. The rest is going to the same rich countries which raised $20 trillion out of thin air. Then Africans go to the market to borrow money. They find that they have to pay 13%, 14% interest rate. Why? Because the rating agencies say Africa is a risky place. Do you know, Hans, there is not a single country rated as of investable grade in Africa. Do you know that? Not a single country in all of Africa is rated as of investable grade. What does this mean? A lot of people cannot invest in Africa. If you are a pension fund, you cannot invest, because if you invest according to Basel rule, you have to put similar amount of money as a reserve to protect your investment. Nobody's going to do that. So the whole system is loaded really, again, it doesn't work. Now, if you borrow at 14%, how can you repay that? You go to the mafia, maybe you get a better rate. I mean, what is this? So the rating agency condemns Africa for failure because of the way it has been rated and the way they've been treated. Then, of course, they fail, and then they turn around, hey, I told you, it's dangerous, isn't it? So it is a vicious circle. It is a vicious circle, and this has to be break. It's not acceptable. So we really, that's why we question this global financial structure put over there. Is it fair? Is it proper? And these institutions, the World Bank, I see you have the CFO of the World Bank. What is their job actually? What is their mission? Those guys were established 80 years ago in a different world. Today, what exactly is their mission? What exactly they are doing? Why are not leveraging their balance book? Why are not coming to help with? And then I look at the reform agenda, the roadmap of the World Bank, etc. Not a word about governance. Not a single word about governance. Look at the governance of these institutions. It's governed by those guys from the north. Oh, we are the big shareholders. But that's the whole system. Greece has a problem, money comes straight away. Ukraine has a problem, money comes away. So if you are Sri Lanka or Zambia, you can wait 2 years, 3 years until the board say, okay, we can do something, restructure debt, etc. This is absolute crap. This is not acceptable. And this is because the developing country, please, let me finish. The developing countries have no seat on the table. These boards, look, even independent companies listed in a stock exchange here or London, by law, they must have independent directors. Companies here in Germany, even the workers sit at the board. Where is Africa on the board of the IMF or the board of the World Bank? These are your clients. Give them some say there. Instead of all this group of guys in the north who maybe never know where Zambia is and they can wait. Let us go to Ukraine, let us go to Greece, let us go. Come on, guys. This world doesn't work. Either you sort it out or wait for China to create a new world order. This is what we need to sort out.
I will come back to you.
Okay.
You had promised to be diplomatic.
I'm very angry because really we are, okay.
But you have given absolutely the cue here to Anshula, who is now in a really hot seat as the World Bank is anyway in the eye of the storm in this reform debate. Anshula, you've heard Mo, you've heard about the broader needs. How is the World Bank going to address those?
Thank you. And first, let me say good afternoon to everyone. It's really a pleasure to join you. I wish I was there, physically, but it's good to be here virtually. I agree with the State Secretary. We are so tremendously off track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And also, if you look at the recent past with all these multiple crises, the other fact is that growth in emerging market and developing economies is expected to remain subdued. And the challenge is that poverty could rise further. So, we need global solutions. We need them at scale. And I think that is clearly the reason why, for the last 6 months, the World Bank Group has been, involved in this evolution roadmap work. And in the recent spring meetings, governors endorsed proposals to integrate sustainability, resilience, inclusiveness more fully into our mission. So we are working on that. And this has to sit alongside poverty reduction and shared prosperity. I think after a lot of discussion and debate, everyone agreed that this is not something that can go off the table. It has to remain critical to our mission. They also agreed to stretch our balance sheet for middle-income countries. And as you all know, it sort of has the potential to release up to 50 billion additional funding over the next decade. And I just want to mention very quickly here that IBRD has a pretty good leveraging model already. We received about 20 billion in paid-in capital since inception. Mo mentioned more than 80 years, yes, nearly 80 years. But with this 20 billion, we have been able to connect investors to projects of more than $800 billion, which generate sustainable development benefits for these client countries of IBRD. So if you think about it, IBRD's intermediation role, we issue bonds to private investors. How do we do that? We leverage our equity, but we also leverage the tacit and overt strong shareholder support. And that enables us this great leverage mechanism to channel funds towards development for IBRD countries. And of course, maybe I can talk about it a little later, but we are exploring very actively more measures, how to increase further the financing capacity for IBRD, of course, while retaining our AAA rating, which is critical to this model. As the State Secretary said that the needs are so huge, it cannot be just the public sector who can do this. It has to be all resources, all hands on deck, whether it's domestic, it's international, it's public or private sectors. But, Mo, you made a very strong point in terms of Africa, and I agree with most of what you say, but I would just like to say that IDA remains really a great example of strong international partnership. We offer exceptional value for money for the lowest income countries. IDA, today is able to mobilize almost $4 billion for each $1 of contribution we get from donors. And how do we do that? We are doing that with a very innovative financing model, which combines donor contribution with private capital for market borrowing. So today, IDA is market facing and we raise funds from the bond markets. And of course, then we get the reflows from past IDA credits. And let me say, more than 70%, 72% of IDA support has gone to countries in Africa in the recent past. The second thing I want to say is, you mentioned about the debt problem, the challenge of getting capital flows, private capital flows into Africa. We agree with you completely. But how IDA is structured, the higher the indebtedness of a country, the more the element of grant or outright grant resources we give to countries. So we have this, light, red light, yellow light, green light system. So countries which are in debt distress or high risk are the red light countries, and those countries receive as much as possible outright grants. So, just to say that we are very mindful as we try to enhance capacity for IBRD and middle income countries for climate financing, for mitigation and adaptation. We are mindful that IDA needs are really very high. The poorest countries have been hit the hardest. So we are having a two-pronged approach. We are mobilizing resources, we are enhancing financing capacity for IBRD, but at the same time, we are keeping a laser-sharp focus on IDA. We are looking at additional balance sheet optimization options for IDA, and we have also launched a special crisis facility for IDA, for which we are calling for support. So,
Anshula,
okay.
Thank you. We'll come back to that, but let me just build on what you said and come back to my earlier question to you, Jochen, on the multilateral development banks. Within the various sources of finance that one has to look at for the broader challenge, the multilateral development banks are perhaps the lowest hanging fruit. And I know that you and the ministry have been very heavily involved in this reform discussion. Can you give us a little bit a sense of that? Also now listening to Anshula and listening to Mo about the governance dimension of that reform.
Yeah. I think the World Bank reform or the MDB reforms as a whole, we are also looking at the regional development banks, is part of the big picture. It has to be done, but it cannot be the only instrument to look at development finance. But it is key as a World Bank group, is the largest development financier. So Svenja Schulze, as the governor, took the initiative together with Janet Yellen. Of course, it's a window of opportunity. A couple of years earlier, it would not have been possible. So take it and make something out of it. And I think it's not a big. It's not a small reform we are thinking about. It needs to be a big one, and there is a window of opportunity. And what we do want is that the World Bank becomes the real transformation bank, and that there is a lot to discuss about. What we want is that the World Bank focuses a lot on global public good, that it makes it as part of its business genetics. Not only to look at what does a loan do in a single country, but what does it do to the broader audience. So if a country invests in renewables, of course it benefits for the economic development of this country, but at the same time there is also a global public benefit because we are limiting climate change. And this has to be part of the conditions and the concessionality. So that is a big thing. The second one is to look at policy reforms. We need to get away. I know, Anshula, our common friend Axel gets usually crazy when I say it. We have to get away from the more charity approaches, focused on small, little, tiny projects, maybe bigger projects, to policy reforms. And I just want to give one example because it's so telling. If you look at the JETP with South Africa, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, I'm really a fan of that because First, it's following a logic of an investment plan. It's not randomly. But the biggest thing is that we are also financing policy reforms. And that is the change of the energy regulation in South Africa with fair and non-discriminatory access to the grid. Whoever provides electricity to the grid can do it. And this changed the whole model. Then you don't need a single ODA cent because wind and solar are business cases in South Africa. And that changes, and at the same time, it shrinks our problem, because then you don't need the development money because it's paid by itself. But let me just add 2-3 more sentences, because I think it's really relevant. As I was speaking about shrinking the problem, the size of the financial needs. At environment, when I was there, the first thing, if we look at a problem, we ask, is there a way to regulate it? Can we forbid it if there is something bad? At development, the whole community, we think about bills, we think about money. I think we should have more courage to regulate. Look at the supply chain regulation that we are doing that does a lot of very good things to the whole set of SDGs. Then again, private finance that was mentioned by several of our partners is the key is the capital market conditions. And therefore, as we can't change the logic in a second, we need to work on de-risking the investments. And that is something where we can come in with first losses, covering first losses, guarantees, but also where our partner countries come in to work on enabling environment, to work at the biggest obstacles for investors, such as corruption, non-legal certainty, and all these things.
Can I have 2 sentences follow-up on Mo's question about the governance? Do you see a commitment to also address the governance issues in this broader context?
Not everybody, of course. They are different on all sides. And you heard some heard our chancellor yesterday here when he advocated for giving the African Union a seat at the G20. And not to make it as we did it when we invited for G7, we invited Senegal and we invited South Africa. But this is a kind of generosity, and we do want to get it away from generosity to a legal place at the governance structures where decisions are made, and that is the same for the MDBs. But as I said, we are not all on one page. Some have a different view on it.
We'll come back to that. Mo, if I could just pick up on the jet piece that Jochen mentioned as a sort of new piece in the financial architecture. And Bang, Indonesia is one of the pioneers in this. Is this sort of a promising approach forward, that we build country platforms and then focus the mobilization effort at the country level?
Yeah, certainly. I think we as a country, I mean the government of the country, needs to prepare, for example, list of potential investment that can be done by, potential private investor from overseas. But let me touch a little bit on one of the big complaints from, let's say, from potential developer in renewable energy towards the private financing that supposed to be dedicated for climate financing. The biggest complaint is there is no difference in terms of the cost of financing, meaning the interest rate for any project, general project, even including the fossil project, not much different with the interest rate coming from the private capital overseas for funding climate change activities in Indonesia, for example. So, because there is no difference, then of course the appetite to invest more in renewable energy or climate financing issues, I think will be less. I believe there are several ways to make sure the cost of financing will be bearable by most of the potential investors, especially that potential investor to developing economy. Number one, I think, I believe in the part of the World Bank Group, I remember there is MIGA, and MIGA, I think, has a good position to provide some kind of assurance or guarantee for any investment that related to the, let's say, renewable energy in the developing economy. Of course, you might have to pay something, but at least the guarantee that provided can create higher flow of private capital into developing economy, especially on the renewable energy investment. So, and then I believe in not only World Bank Group, other development banks, like what I know, the ADB, Asian Development Bank, as well as Islamic Development Bank, has similar institution like MIGA that provide some kind of guarantee or assurance for investment in so-called high-risk country. So that can be, bundled into the scheme in the blended financing. The other ideas, I think JETP, is a good platform, as you mentioned, and JETP, I think, is a good example on how the consortium of not only multilateral but also bilateral, as well as the role of philanthropic organization, because we know there are some philanthropic organizations directly involved in this JETP scheme, together with bilateral, let's say, from US and also from Multilateral Development Bank. So I think this JETP platform could be a good start, to make sure there will be more private capital financing for development economy. Last but not least, this is more on G2G. Maybe I like to hear from Ms. Khan regarding the potential debt swap for climate change. I think debt swap initiative, I remember in Indonesia, initiated by the German government when we had, I think, a big disaster in Aceh, the tsunami in Aceh. And I think this kind of debt swap might be useful, especially for low-income country. So to make sure that even though we have big needs for climate financing, but it doesn't mean that we are trying to create future debt crisis. Yeah. So I think debt swap could be one of solutions.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and great that you bring that in. Anshula, I'll give you a minute to prepare your thoughts, but Mo, you have heard a few reactions to what you've said. Can you kind of comment particular about this question, how we lower the cost of finance?
A few points, really. First, to Jochen, my friend here, about the governance. You guys teach us governance, and you preach us about governance. Why don't you practice it? I mean, you take any bank, Deutsche Bank, any bank here or any in the West, those banks have independent directors. Yeah? Any bank has independent. Why not the World Bank? Why not the IMF? Because you guys are obsessed with control. The president of the World Bank has to be American. The head of the IMF has to be European. Excuse me, the world have 8 billion people. Why you 450 million people think you are the master of the universe? And we don't have any smart people who can run any of this organization. You have monopoly of know-how and knowledge. You are masters of the universe. This is not right. You need to be inclusive. Bring people around the table. So you cannot argue that, yes, shareholders of the World Bank and IMF, you get 60% of the vote, 70% of the vote, 75% of the vote, but allow 25% for this 7-8 billion people. This is the problem. You see, you guys in the West teach us about democracy, liberals, values, etc., but then we look at you, you are not practicing it. That is not right. You need to carry people with you. So that is the point on governance. And I notice our friend CFO of the World Bank never mentioned the word governance. Of course, maybe she's worried because something unique about the World Bank. It's the only bank in the world where the board of directors live in the building. Is that true? How come the board of directors, the whole guys, have offices and sit in the bank? They eat, you go around and do that. Excuse me, you guys get out of here. Let the managers do the job. But those guys want to have control. They need to control everything. And if you say anything wrong, directors from Germany and US will be in her office in 1 minute. That's why she has to be careful what she says, because this guy sit on top of them. Please, you breach governance, Brexit. That is really important. 3 or 4 suggestions I really want to make. All these MDBs need to really enhance the resources. The need is huge. Secondly, they need to be too smart about leveraging that. And they have great advantage because as lenders, they have precedence over any other commercial lenders. The rating energy should take that into account, and that gives them more leeway to lend without losing their cherished AAA status. Please be smart, use all that, and please be quick response. It's not only about Greece and Ukraine, it's about Zambia and other people, and get moving. When these things there, kill the fire before it expands. They take a huge amount of time to deal with those guys. This is not right.
Thank you, Mo. And you're going to get the audience prize here. But Anshula, you have 1 minute and 34 seconds. There were quite a few points that went in your direction. I'm sure it's going to be quite a task, but you're up to it.
Hans-Peter, what to respond to, so I'll start backwards, Mo, your points are very well taken. Need to enhance resources, need to leverage more. Yes, that's exactly what we are working on. And, I won't sort of list out the things we are currently working on. And we are very, very much advanced to announce and share with all of you as we go over the next few months up to the annual meetings, what are the things we are doing. But, it sort of involves the entire ecosystem. It involves the shareholders' support. It involves the private sector support. It involves philanthropy support, and that is what we are looking for in different ways, how we can get that support. And the end result is to be mobilizing more resources for both IBRD and IDA. That is one. Coming to the points mentioned by Bambang on MIGA, yes, exactly. MIGA is working very well taken. We have the political risk insurance, we have the non-honoring instrument. And those instruments are already being used judiciously, and we are working on how to scale those up as we bring in more private capital and mobilize more private capital. You mentioned debt for nature swap, and we all read about the recent transaction which happened in Ecuador. So this is something we have looked at, we are examining. And, I would say that it has to be examined case by case. So where the debt situation or the debt is very large, it needs a bigger restructuring, and how you can fit in the debt for nature swap within that can be an option. So case by case, situation by situation, I think it's a good instrument to explore. And, coming back to what the State Secretary said initially, he mentioned about great expectations from the World Bank Group. I think we really, we take pride in the fact that there are such huge expectations from us. So what are we doing? These are not simple things. It's not just about increasing financing. Of course, as you evolve to include global public goods into what we deliver through the country engagement model, a lot of it is also about how we need to change or adapt our operational models, how we need to change our financing instruments. So, for instance, currently we are working on a project where, yeah, sorry.
Did you hear me? Yeah, unfortunately, we're
not aware about governance. Not aware about governance.
So,
you are worried about the director jumping on you. Yes,
this is more an issue for the shareholders, for Anshula. But we have run out of time.
Maybe I can have a bilateral meeting with Mo on governance.
And
I look forward.
I've been told that we will be forcefully ejected if we don't come to a conclusion. So we have to come to a conclusion. I can't provide any summary, but it's very clear that there are some major issues. There's some agreement on the need for reform. There are some gaps in that reform discussion, especially around governance. We understand that we have to blend, we have to use de-risking instruments like MIGA, but on a much bigger scale than has been.
And we have to be fast.
And it has to be fast. We have urgency, and the whole story here has to be done in a very short period of time. And that sense of urgency is something which we hope that governments are going to help inject. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for this discussion.
Thank you very much.